Alright guys, a couple weeks ago I made a video about the C8 Corvette, and it was mostly about how Motor Trend completely screwed up the dyno test and wrote an article about it, completely inaccurate information. So, Motor Trend was wrong. The C8 Stingray does not have 650 horsepower. And then just put it out there and even backed it up with a video to say that, hey, this thing's got 650 horsepower.
But which of these numbers is true? The 495 that Chevrolet is claiming, or the 650 that we saw?
I'm leaning more towards the 650 that we saw.
And I'm not an engineer, but in my mind, I knew that wasn't right. I think most people on the internet also did not think that was right. And it's fascinating, some of the comments I got. I got a lot of comments on the video and on Instagram about how I'm a Corvette hater, how I'm wrong, how people telling me, no, it's got 657 horsepower. And many of these people were not just taking a step back and logically thinking, there's no way I can take the LT1, make a couple of minor modifications, and then magically have 150 more horsepower. And I guess some people just bought into it based on one article and one test, because they were completely blind to reality. They just put their Corvette or Chevy blinders on and saw what they wanted to see. You know, what's interesting about the video that I made was, I think a lot of people thought I was bashing the Corvette. I was not. I love the Corvette. I love the C8. I think it's amazing. I don't care how many horsepower it has, the performance numbers don't change. It could have 20 horsepower or 1,000 horsepower, but if it still does the quarter mile in 11.1, then it does the quarter mile in 11.1. That doesn't change based on what the horsepower is. What I was doing was talking about how Motor Trend was wrong. And sure enough, they have finally now, a couple weeks later, admitted they were wrong. So, let's look at their article. So in this article, Motor Trend admits that during the last day of the car in their care, they took their Corvette to a Mustang dyno. And they say it was a Mustang dyno that they had previously used and previously been reliable. They put, obviously, they tested this 2020 Ram 2500 Cummins on there and believed that the numbers that it showed were also realistic. And so they felt like this test was realistic based on other things that they thought validated it, rather than just questioning whether or not this test itself was valid. So they went on to admit that the dyno operator made some errors. There were two settings on the dyno that were incorrect that made it show an incorrect result. One of the key factors entered that was incorrect was the road load horsepower at 50 miles an hour. They didn't really have the right number. They didn't get the right number from Chevy, and they did a very quick estimate on what they believed the number was going to be. And the dyno operators entered 12.6, and then later Chevrolet got back to Motor Trend and said that the number should have been 15.4. That obviously is a big difference percentage-wise. The other major factor as to why it came out with wrong information was that the dyno operator had the dyno set on all-wheel drive. I don't know how this is overlooked. So these two factors made a big difference. Obviously, if a car is believed to be all-wheel drive by the computer and it's pushing out a lot of power to two sets of wheels, it assumes it should have more power because it's assuming it's also pushing power to the two front wheels, but it was not doing so. So that factor was very incorrect. They go on to say that there's no way for them to virtually rerun this test. The only way they could do it is with an actual C8 car that they could put on a different dyno and rerun it again. So they don't have that opportunity right now. But what they wanted to do next was analyze the data that they did get from driving the cars and testing them while they did have the cars and doing what they're going to call a road dyno. based on all of the data they collected while testing the acceleration and the drag racing and the quarter-mile speeds and things like that. So with all of that information factored together, they got numbers anywhere between 425 to 450, which if you assume a 15% drivetrain loss, that comes to right at about 500 horsepower. So the car rated at 495, we're in the right ballpark. Then they had another opportunity to test another Corvette on a racetrack, and I'm glad they took this opportunity. This is probably why it took them a while to respond over the past 2 weeks to all the criticism, was because they did want to get their hands on a new car and do some other testing. They didn't do an actual dyno test on it, but they did more road dyno testing. To do this testing, they used what they wrote as the fanciest 100 hertz V-box we measured. I feel like there's a little sarcasm in putting the word fanciest in there. Again, I think a little poke at the public to say that they shouldn't be questioning them. But anyway, so they did a lot of testing with this V-box device and got a lot of information from it. And they came out with horsepower at the wheels about 395 horsepower and torque about 350. Assuming a 15% drivetrain loss, that comes to about 465 horsepower and 412 pound-feet of torque. So different results. Those numbers are actually much lower than the SAE numbers at 495 horsepower, but I still think that gives you a little bit of wiggle room there, where now you have one number that's a little bit lower than what the 495 is, and one number that's a little bit higher, but at least they're in the same ballpark, within 30 or so horsepower plus or minus. So those numbers kind of make sense. Again, nothing like 650. I'm sorry if any of you guys were sold on the 650 horsepower number, but finally now it is proven that it was incorrect. They summarize and end their article by saying that for now, let's just say we're convinced our red test car was certainly making every bit of its rated output of 495 horsepower and 470 pound-feet of torque, if not slightly more. Stay tuned as this saga continues. So just again, that last sentence, I think they are trying to say that they weren't completely wrong and they expect to get more data from more cars in the future to maybe prove them a little more right. So this entire article is titled as "What Really Happened." It's not titled as "Hey, we were wrong and we screwed up." And a couple of lines written within the article make it sound like that as well. They're not necessarily admitting that they're completely wrong. They're just admitting there were a couple of errors and that stay tuned for more. I mean, it's I think some wordplay there to make it be less negative for them, but ultimately, this is a pretty bad look for Motor Trend. Looks good for Corvette either way. Looks good for Chevy either way. They're probably sitting back liking some of the publicity that's coming from it, and it's probably diverting some of the news away from the delay in production. But ultimately, Motor Trend really screwed this one up. And again, I have to say, I have no idea why a publication of their size and their reputation would jump the gun on a article like this. I'm assuming what happened is they did the test, they got the information, they probably believed it wasn't completely correct, but I'm sure someone at Motor Trend, now becoming part of a much larger organization with Discovery, wanted them to make this article because they knew they wouldn't get their hands on another C8 to dyno test anytime soon, and they were the only ones able to do so at the time. And so they didn't want to completely lose their opportunity at publishing this article, so they just published what they had, even though I bet you some of them knew it was wrong. So that's really unfortunate. I really, it's shame on Motor Trend, shame on Discovery. I'm a subscriber of Motor Trend. I love what they've done for many, many years. This isn't going to say I'm not going to anymore. Hopefully they learn something from this, and they learn that this kind of journalism is dumb. So for any of you guys that commented on my YouTube videos or my Instagram posts from a couple of weeks ago saying that I was wrong, saying that I was somehow bashing the Corvette, or saying that somehow it did have 650 horsepower and I'm the idiot. Please go read the article. Please go look up more information on it. And please just, next time you hear something like this, don't play the fanboy game. Don't think everything that someone says about my Corvette is the coolest thing in the world, so I'm going to believe it. Your Corvette's going to be awesome. Your Corvette's great. This going from 495 horsepower down to from 650 doesn't change how fast your car is. Don't be offended when someone's calling out the magazine for being wrong, when your car is just as cool as it was. That doesn't change. So, think twice before you comment on things like that. Anyway, that's all I got for you. Some interesting news came out today from Motor Trend, so I really had to share it with you because of the information that I've made in the past. So hopefully you enjoyed this video. Give me a like if you did. Hit me a subscribe, and we'll see you next time. Adios.